Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I am pretty pumped for today's show. I have Roger Ferguson, President and CEO of TIAA with me. How are you doing, Roger?
I am great. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Yes, we are happy to have you. So last week, we actually had Ray Bellucci and Adib Khan on with us from TIAA, and they talked about community involvement in Denver, and we are so thankful that you had some time to come out to Denver and talk with us as well.
Great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. Well, one thing that I do with all of my guests that I have on is I make sure that our audience understands who our guest is and your background and how you got involved with TIAA.
Okay, so I'll start at the very beginning, so to speak. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and my father worked for the government. He was a map maker in the Army. My mother was a school teacher. And out of those two individuals, I got two things that led me ultimately to TI. One is, through my mother, real interest in education. And she really insisted that we stay in school as long as we could. In my case, I stayed in school until I was almost 30 years old. I'm not sure that's what she had in mind, but nevertheless, that's the way it worked out. And my father, while he's professionally a map maker, what his real interest was in investing. And we didn't have much money, but he had grown up during the Depression and was very interested in banks and how banks worked because of that. And so while we had no money, he spent a lot of his time thinking about investments and moving his small amounts of money around. So when most dads would talk to their sons about sports things and box scores, my father would be talking about interest rates and where he can get the best return on his little CD. So I grew up in this household with a lot of financial literacy and a lot of literacy overall. So fast forward, went to college, got a PhD in economics, a law degree.
From a little university called Harvard, right?
At a little university called Harvard.
Okay.
in a small state called Massachusetts. And started out first as a lawyer for just a year or two. That really didn't suit me professionally, though it's important for other folks, for sure.
Whoa, what turned you away from law?
Let me tell you two things. One, the things I liked and the things that didn't seem quite right for me. So what I really liked was client service, helping businesses solve problems. I thought, for me at least, I wanted to do that in a broader scope, not simply legal problems, but bigger business problems. And so as I was thinking about what I really wanted to do, that took me to consulting, where still heavily focused on clients, heavily focused on solving problems, but in a broader range. So I worked at McKinsey & Company for about 13 years and learned an awful lot there. And then was very fortunate to get a job at the government. I worked at the Federal Reserve for about 9 years, almost 10. And as I was leaving, I started working for a reinsurance company, which is more technical things. And then I got a phone call out of the blue from an executive recruiter saying, gee, you may not know this company called TIAA or TIAA Cref, as it was known then, but they're looking for a CEO, and your name has come up. And what she didn't know was that indeed I did know a great deal about TIAA Cref, and I jumped at the opportunity. And many, many interviews later, here I am. I've been leading this company since 2008. And so that's the story.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on your tenure.
Thank you.
Have 10 years under your belt, 11 now.
11. Yeah.
I imagine that going straight into the CEO position maybe was a little intimidating, or perhaps it was par for the course for you. How did you feel about that?
It was a little bit of both.
Okay.
Without a doubt, it was somewhat intimidating. I had never led anything of this scale and scope before. And very importantly, it was in 2008, which was the beginning of the financial crisis, which I had some reason to think might be coming along based on some other experiences. So intimidation and a big sense of responsibility. At the same time, our company is around two or three things that are really important and I feel pretty comfortable with. One is we serve people in the not-for-profit sector. Higher ed in particular. So, think of my 11, 12 years as a student. So I felt very attuned to what folks in higher ed and the not-for-profit sector do broadly. Secondly, this is really primarily a company focused on investing people's money wisely so that they can have good financial security. So think back to what I said about my father, growing up in a household where it was all about investments. And so I felt comfortable with that, and having been at the Federal Reserve, which sets interest rates, comfortable with markets as well. So that part was comfortable. And then very much a mission-driven organization and a mission of creating financial well-being for millions of individuals who are very busy making a big difference in the world. We call them difference makers. So those three things really resonated with me and who I am and what I stand for. And as I said, I did happen to know, not very well, but I knew one of the iconic CEOs of the organization, a guy named William Greenough. He was the father of a good friend of mine. So I had just a little bit of a personal connection as well. So a little bit of intimidation, being CEO, never done it before, but in a space that I felt I knew reasonably well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and hearing about your past and how much schooling you had, and that your mother really encouraged you to continue your education for as long as you could, and considering that your dad had such gusto for interest rates and
investments
finance,
and things.
Right, exactly. I'm surprised that you didn't take the route of, say, accountant or professor or teacher yourself. Any reason why you chose this route rather than something more in line with what your parents did?
Well, when I was getting out of graduate school in particular, that was a choice I could have made.
Yeah.
I was approached by a couple of very solid universities wanting me to come and teach law and economics, either in the law school or the economics department. But yet I had a calling for something that would be more immediately and directly impactful in solving problems. And that's not in any sense to say that folks in the classroom aren't having a major impact, because they obviously are. But I wanted to be out more directly solving problems. And in the academic world, particularly in higher education, in order to get ahead, you have to be focused on two things. One is teaching and also research. And while I always was sort of drawn to teaching, I really didn't think research and spending my time, in the computer room, running regression analyses was going to be sufficient in terms of actually, solving concrete problems.
Yeah.
And so, that's why I made the call towards the non-academic, the so-called real world.
Yeah.
And it's worked out. It's worked out well. And now I'm fortunate enough to still be in and around the periphery of higher ed, which I love deeply, while also trying to help them solve some very pressing challenges in terms of financial well-being for all those great folks in the not-for-profit sector.
Yes, and I would agree that it's worked out pretty well for you as well. And I also share the passion of not enjoying research. I, long time ago, was a psych major, and I knew how much research went into that job, and changed majors immediately, actually, once I realized how much was entail for that. So I appreciate, it seems as though you have more of a passion for people. Yes, and so I want to talk a little bit about TIAA's mission, and I like what you call your customers difference makers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is an intriguing title, but exciting nonetheless. So let's talk about TIAA and their mission as far as making sure that we are taking care of our customers.
Absolutely. So we call our customers a number of things. I've called them difference makers, as you heard. Last year, for our 100th anniversary as a company, we gave out awards to difference makers, and so that was important. We also call them participants because they really participate fully in the economics of our organization. So our mission is to get people safely to and through retirement. We were started 100 years ago, the vision of Andrew Carnegie. He was on the board of trustees at Cornell University, went up to Ithaca, New York, and saw that the professors there were, in many cases, not making enough money to retire. They literally were going to the classroom to their practically last day. And so he developed this notion of creating a retirement system. And we predate Social Security by about 17, 18 years. And where this idea was a new concept when Andrew Carnegie and his colleagues created it. So fast forward 100 years, the mission's still the same. creating financial well-being for individuals at all stages of life, because you can't get safely to retirement or through retirement if you don't get safely to retirement. And we've gone from basically about $1 million that we started with to now $1.2 trillion of money that we manage or administer. And we serve 15,000 institutions and 5 million Americans. And I'm really proud that we've never missed a retirement payment and have had really good performance for long periods of time. And as you point out, while I have this academic scholarly background, like many folks, I get much of my energy from people. And in our case, it's the 17,000, almost 18,000 individuals, associates who work for the company, and the 5 million people that we serve. And whenever I'm in the company of either group, our colleagues and employees, or the folks that we serve, our participants, the difference makers, I'm really energized, I'm really jazzed, because what they do is so very, very important.
I love hearing that. It's not often that you get to hear a CEO really brag about their people. But in turn, I don't know that you've had a chance to listen to the show that I did with Ray and Adib yet, but they were so excited about what you do, and they had nothing but wonderful things to say. One of the things that they said is that you are available to all of your people, no matter what time it is. And they actually mentioned the award ceremony that you did for your 100 years.
Yes.
And that you would, you'd just pull up to a table and just sit with people for a little bit and talk with them. So
I think that's really important.
Yeah.
As I say, I'm very fortunate because I in many ways get to represent this company, along with Adib, along with Ray, and along with others. I'm often the voice and the face of the organization. But the truth of the matter is so much of the work, all of the work really gets done by the 17,000, 18,000 associates. And I thank them at the end of every town hall for coming to work every day and really giving it their all for our participants. Because I know for a while that while I get to talk about how the company's grown and how we've served millions of Americans, all of that service is being done by individuals who never have a chance to come on to this kind of program. So I'm incredibly grateful to the folks who, frankly, make me look good. And they make me look good because they do their jobs really well. And that, in turn, means that we can be proud of who we are and what we do, because we've got 17,000, 18,000 people all pulling in the same direction, do slightly different things, but sharing a common mission, vision, and set of values. So I'm always available because those are the folks that really are doing the work on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, that is delightful that you say that. And I have to tell you, every single person I've come into contact with at TIAA has been nothing but elated to be where they are, and they just have a general joyous outlook, which is awesome to see. And it's clear that you provide such a great environment at TIAA for that. That being said, I want to ask you a little bit about leadership here. Because you do make yourself available, not every company has a CEO that's available to their frontline workers, right? Was there something that you decided upon once you took this role over to make sure that you were available, or is it just part of who you are?
I think it's just part of who I am, but it's also part of my philosophy of leadership. You talked a bit about that.
Yeah.
And so my view of leadership is you can't be a good leader if you don't have followers. I joke, if you look over your shoulder and no one's following you, you're not a leader. You're sort of a clown. You're out there by yourself. You may be entertaining, but you're not leading. And so when I think about leadership, I think, well, what does it take to get other individuals to want to follow you? And it seems that there are 4 characteristics, and the way I work, I hope, embodies those things. One is you really have to have an expertise. Individuals don't want to follow someone who's just a rank amateur, not sure what's going on. And your expertise could be very technical. It could be how an organization works. It could be a range of things, but you have to have some expertise. The second thing that I say is you've obviously got to have a vision. You have to be clear about where you're going. If you want people to follow you, where are you leading them? And that's sort of common to almost anyone's view of leadership. The next 2 may be less common. One is around empathy. And so this really important point that 17,000, 18,000 people come to work at TIAA every day doing the right thing. Well, I've got to recognize that those folks also have real lives. They've got families, they've got friends. Some days they're up, some days they're less up. And I've got to really help them understand that I understand where they might be coming from, so to speak, and be very empathetic, because I've got a family, and you have ups and downs, and so recognizing that that's an important part of everyone's life, I hope, makes me a better leader. People, I think, want to follow someone who really sort of understands that they're human beings. They're not cogs in a machine. And then the final point I make about leadership is you really have to have fortitude. It's not always going to be easy. Business life is not, a smooth escalator that just simply moves up. Ups, downs, sideways, different things happen. And I think the followers want to see that their leader maintains a degree of fortitude, and even when, the bad things start to happen in life. So with that philosophy of leadership, a reason to be really available is it's a way to show expertise that I might bring.
Yeah.
It's certainly a way to reinforce the vision that we all share in common. Very importantly, way to sort of touch people and see how they're doing and convey that empathy. And so I think it's really important to be available.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned that owning and working for a business, it's not an escalator.
It's not.
It is not. It's definitely got its ups and downs. I find that when people talk a little bit about some failures that they've witnessed or had happen to them in their reign as leaders, that they kind of get a renewed sense of energy and a renewed sense of like moving forward with the company. Has there ever been a time in your career, either at TIAA or before, that you've witnessed some failure that you were like, I'm not going to do that?
Well, I'll tell you about a personal failure that and the lesson I learned from it.
Yeah.
So I was at McKinsey, as I said, for a long period of time. McKinsey & Company is arguably the premier consulting firm in the world, and it's a very rigorous professional environment, and they have a mindset of what's called up or out. Either you're promoted to being a partner, or you leave and find another thing to do. So I was doing reasonably well, not perfect, but seemed likely that I was going to be promoted to being a partner. Wasn't 100%, but more likely than not. And for my last study, the last engagement, working with a client, I got a little sloppy, frankly. And my job as a senior associate was to do quality control on the work that all the other associates were doing, so that when the final report went to the client, it was right. So in this very big meeting, we were flipping through pages, and it turned out that some of the numbers were wrong and some of the modeling was wrong. And the senior partner was there, and you can see that he smoothed it over as best he could, but he clearly was not happy. And it was on me. I had been the one who didn't do the quality control. I didn't then turn and go after the junior associate and blame him. I sort of took the responsibility. That frankly delayed my movement to partnership for a little while. I had to find some different mentors and other things. I eventually got promoted to the partnership, so it has a happy ending. But that failure of not doing my job perfectly well, having to take responsibility for it, and then coming back to find another path into partnership, all of those things sort of help me think about what to do when failure occurs. First, looking in the eye and take your accountability for it.
Yeah. Figure
out how to fix it. But then you have to figure out how to bounce back as well, and maybe find another path. And so, as I have had that kind of personal failure, it's a chance for me to sort of reinforce a number of other things I think are really important about accountability, about resilience, about keeping your head up, and about knowing that life is not going to be an escalator. I often say that careers are a rock climbing wall. If you've ever done rock climbing, the path to the top is not always clear. You start at one place, you may move vertically, you may actually move horizontally, straight across, you may actually take a step back. You may have trouble getting a handhold. And that's the way careers are. And my experience that I just conveyed to you is one of those examples where I had to restart, but it was important to take personal accountability and then be ready to fix the problem and then show that you can still do the right work and restart.
Awesome. Those are great words of encouragement, and I'm sure that
Good. I'm glad you think so.
Yeah, I'm sure that your encouragement to your team, if you will, your workers, I'm sure that they take great pride in what they do because they know that they can fail and still have room to grow.
Absolutely. And they're not my workers, by the way. We're all employees of the same company.
And that's why I said team at first.
Right. We're all part of a big team, and we call each other associates, so that's what we are.
Yes, thank you. And I see that right there is a great example of how you're such a good leader. You wouldn't let me call them your workers.
You're
They're your
kind.
associates.
Thank you very much.
So I want to talk a little bit more. In the last episode that I had with TIAA, we talked about volunteerism.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the strong tenets that you have at TIAA. And we got into quite a bit of detail about that. But I wanted to ask your opinion on why you made sure that that was something that you kept on board with TIAA's mission when you started in 2008.
There are three reasons why I think it's important, this volunteerism. One is, frankly, internal. People like working in an organization when they can bring their values and work together around something that's common that may not simply be the day-to-day, but another very important activity. And, it creates a sort of internal momentum and internal energy and excitement. Last year, which was our 100th anniversary, we had 100 days of volunteer activity. And we had thousands of people of our various associates out doing different things, and it's energizing for the individuals. Secondly, we really want to be good citizens in wherever it is that we happen to have an office. Here in Denver, we've got an office. We have about 1,500 people. It's really important that we figure out ways to give back because that's an important part of being a good citizen in the community. And we are a corporate citizen in our communities. We care that they work really well. So Deep may have told you one of the things that we did here. We did many, but we built a playground. And I went out and put on my T-shirt and helped. I'm not sure I did anything really constructive, but I did what I could to be there as part of the team. And so that's important. And frankly, the third reason is we're not a publicly traded company. We don't do as much advertising on TV as others do. And so I think it's really important for us to find different ways to get our brand name out there and, explain what our corporate culture is and how we work. And, having volunteers around the country wearing our T-shirts and, saying we're from TIAA starts in a sort of person-to-person way, build a deeper understanding of who we are with some folks whom we may serve, but other folks who just may want to know who we are and therefore become supporters, so to speak. So I think there are all those reasons, internally, good corporate citizenship, and frankly, it sort of helps build the kind of brand that I want us to have.
I like that.
Yeah.
Volunteering I think should be almost mandatory at every company. But then if you make it mandatory,
right.
people don't want to do it.
It's not really volunteering, right? No, it's got to be driven by the energy of the individuals. And we try to make sure that most of the volunteer work that we do speaks to our mission. So a lot of our volunteer work is around financial literacy and financial well-being and around community development in one way or the other. Yeah. And so those are some of the things that we really want to stand for.
Yeah, and speaking of financial literacy, I know that that's one conversation that is tough to have, making sure that your kid knows about finances. So you guys do some great work. I know that you partner with Junior Achievement, both on the national and locally here.
Yeah.
And so doing wonderful work. We do have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more, and perhaps you're going to give me some investing tips.
Okay.
That's what I'm hoping for. Stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Leave us a comment in the section below. And also click on the link in the description so you can find out more about TIAA. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I'm having a fascinating conversation here with Roger Ferguson, President and CEO of TIAA. Roger, you've given me such a great overview of TIAA and your background yourself, so
Great.
thank you for that.
Good. It's been my pleasure.
Yes. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we talked about on here, and we touched on it a little bit with Ray and Adib on a previous episode, is the commitment that TIAA has to diversity. I got a lot of great information from them, but you being the leader, I want to ask you what a company would look like if they didn't invest in diversity.
Oh my goodness. Well, you can imagine they'd be, quite homogeneous, and I think the risk that kind of company would face is not having enough different perspectives. Diversity, I think, has two really important roles in the world of business. One is, at least in America, we sort of think that's sort of morally the right thing to do. It's good. It's consistent with who we are, what we stand for. Additionally, though, there's an awful lot of research that's starting to show, just from a very practical business standpoint, that having diverse teams lead to better outcomes. This starts in a very theoretical, abstract way. There's a economist at University of Michigan, and his name is Scott Page, and he's written on diversity and diverse systems being more resilient and withstanding stress a little better. And then there's a lot of business results that are showing that businesses that have more diverse boards, for example, tend to have better performing stock. And so, diversity is really important, not just because it's the right thing to do in a diverse society, but also because it leads to better business outcomes. And it leads to better business outcomes because you have many different perspectives challenging each other. You avoid groupthink. You have people ask you why this, why not that, and it forces better decision making over time.
Awesome, which obviously leads to better profits.
Exactly right.
Right. So there are plenty of companies that actually have really diverse frontline workers, so to speak, the faces of your company, if you will. But why is it important to have that diversity reach up to the executive team?
Okay. Well, let's start with the front line. Individuals want to deal, often, not always, with other individuals that look like them, have some experience in common. Again, particularly in financial services, which is a trust-based business, that empathy, that sense of understanding comes maybe from working with someone who may be a bit more like you. At my company, we also do advice in Spanish, for example, because we think it helps communication. So it's not just the soft things, but people really understand better. So that's why frontline is important. As you move frontline further back, further up, however you want to describe it, equally important to have diverse points of view because, as I said earlier, that's where a lot of the decisions are made, the big strategic questions are made. And I think, it's important to have diverse perspectives there. And in my own company, we started down this path of diversity long before others did. We had our first woman on our board in the 1940s, highly unusual.
Yeah.
First African-American trustee in the 1950s. We promoted our first African-American to being an officer. He was an actuary, I believe, also in the 1950s. And so, this issue of diversity for us is really essential to the DNA of the organization. And in our case, it's in part because we represent and work with a very diverse population. The not-for-profit sector tends to be more diverse. Some parts of it are majority female, for example. And so, we recognize what our client base looks like, our participant base. But also, we learned a long time ago that we make better decisions when we have a more diverse population.
Yeah, absolutely. I like your idea here on the perspective. If not everyone's coming to the table, how can you reach all of your clients if you don't have a point of view from them as well? How does a company, and I want to say, because TIAA is clearly a Fortune 500 company.
Yes.
Yeah. So looking down on a smaller business and perhaps somebody who's rural based, do you have any advice for how they can start to make their company more diverse?
Well, let me start with something that you've implied. I want to make it clear.
Yeah.
So we're having a conversation around diversity. It's not just diversity, it's also inclusion.
Correct.
So you have to have a diverse population. You have to include everybody in. in order to get the benefit of diversity. One of the things that we say at our company is diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being invited out onto the dance floor. And so we want to make sure that people are not just at the party, but they're in the dance floor. So for rural companies, smaller companies, et cetera, I think the goal should still be the same. I would start first with, well, what's the diversity that one can have in that environment? Gender diversity for sure. In many rural places, there's a fair amount of ethnic diversity still, and maybe growing. Think about socioeconomic diversity. Think about age diversity. Maybe in some places, depending on what you're doing, religion might come into play. So there are lots of different ways to think about diversity. And the main goal is just to get people with slightly different life perspectives. In some towns, frankly, quite literally one side of the tracks versus the other. Often socioeconomic differences are driven by sort of geographic differences. So I wouldn't think of location or scale as being a hindrance to a reasonable amount of diversity.
Okay.
Now, there are things you can do in a big city that you can't do in a small town. But if you think cleverly about almost any location, there's ample diversity. One of the things that we say in our company is, I'm not different from you, I'm different like you. And what that means is, there's diversity in every person because no two people are exactly alike. The other side of this, for even the smaller companies, is the issue around inclusion. Some companies, maybe even smaller companies, that have a very powerful founder who's still there, that person may tend to be more dictatorial. And so for them, maybe practicing the diversity of just listening to other people's points of view could be another way to think about diversity. And so even if everyone sort of looks the same, they may not all think the same.
Right.
And so it's diversity of thought as well as the other kinds of diversity that are more visible. And therefore, a good leader, she or he, hopefully will be, bringing that inclusion part to it and learning how to listen for different points of view, even if people seem to have a very similar life experience at a superficial level.
Yeah. Would you say that listening is probably a key component to being a leader?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Unless you're a leader who thinks that you know everything, you would be well advised to listen. A phrase I sometimes use is sort of, none of us is as smart as all of us. And I've been in lots of organizations, starting at Harvard and other places, McKinsey, with a bunch of really smart people. But the collective wisdom is much greater than the individual wisdom of even some really high IQ individuals. And so listening is a great way to leverage all of the wisdom, experience, intelligence that's around you.
I like that. I have so many quotes from you that I'm going to have to write down later. I want to ask you, so you get asked a lot about diversity. One, I know it's a huge tenet for TIAA. And two, you are one of 3 Black CEOs in this country.
Right.
Do you ever get tired of having to bear the burden of answering the question about diversity?
No.
Okay.
No. First, it's not a burden.
It's okay.
It's a chance to share experience, to maybe educate people, certainly hopefully to challenge them to think about things a little differently, maybe add something to their vocabulary. And I think it's really important. As I said, we are a very diverse society. We're going to become, if anything, a more diverse society over the next 15, 20, 30 years. It's predicted that we will be a minority society, so-called. And if we're going to continue to function, particularly as the kind of representative democracy that we are, as well as the kind of capitalist free market society that we are, we're going to have to learn to leverage all the strengths that this country has. And helping people understand how to work in a diverse environment, how to recognize diversity, how to embrace it, why it's important, that it make for better outcomes, not worse outcomes. I think it's really incumbent from all of us who have that experience and exposure to take every opportunity to share those insights with other folks who might be feeling a little more threatened, a little more tentative, or maybe just aren't sure how to deal with diversity. So I'm never tired of talking about it because I really do think it's an important, public service that we can do and continue to make the society very, very strong. And we will only be strong if we learn how to leverage all components of our society. I also think about it from the standpoint of an economist. There are major capitalist societies where the women don't work out of the home and the men do. And I'm not sure that in those societies they're leveraging all of their human resources as fully as they could. And if we're going to have everyone in the workforce, which I hope we will, then we have to really learn how to leverage all of that in a very constructive way. And it will make us very strong economically, as well as make us more cohesive in a social and democratic way.
Yes. And there's an interesting school of thought. I like, you said earlier, I'm different like you, right? So I think you've got an interesting perspective here of a collectivist thought, which our Eastern counterparts tend to have more of a collective view of society than we do. Mm-hmm. We tend to think that we're stronger as individuals here. Mm-hmm. So any thoughts on trying to get that inclusive and collectivist model here? Yeah.
So first thing I start when I talk about diversity by avoiding sort of stereotypes, if you will.
Yes.
So we have 1,500 folks here in Colorado. And I understand that sort of the stereotype of the Mountain West is more rugged and individualistic. On the other hand, if you think about how the Mountain West was developed, it was teams of people working together. This part of the country is well known for its natural resources, for example. Mining, agriculture have been central to how Colorado and other parts of the Mountain West got started. And if you think about what you're doing in a mine, it's teamwork. And these are rugged, tough individuals, but they're getting together, working together. Someone is chipping away at the coal, at the silver, whatever it may be. Somebody else is putting in a little truck and taking it out. Then you've got the refining. So I start by avoiding falling too quickly into the notion that the Mountain West, while we all out here like rugged individualism, the reality is there had to be a lot of teamwork just to make this work. This was a pretty tough environment. I can't imagine those first settlers really sort of truly going to on their own.
Yeah.
They were building towns, they were building communities, they were coming together, and so I would argue, let's just think about what really made the Mountain West so highly successful and productive. And it was a bunch of tough individuals. This was not for the faint of heart, this environment, year-round. But it was for them to come together in groups and teams to really, so to speak, conquer all the great resources out here. One couldn't get, think about the Transcontinental Railroad coming, through the Rockies. That was not, one person with a little hammer. All the great achievements have ultimately been done by, maybe rugged individuals, but working together in a team mindset. And so in that sense, I don't think it's East versus Mountain West. I think it's, what really creates success is ultimately all about teamwork.
Yes. Which you guys are great at.
Yeah.
Moving into a different direction, sort of, we are talking about diversity, and June is Immigrant Heritage Month as well as Pride.
Yes.
So that's for the immigration population as well as the LGBTQ population. Right. Exciting month. I, for one, am excited for different cultural events that we have going on throughout Colorado. Anything that TIAA is doing to help celebrate either of these?
Well, we celebrate in many different ways. So back in our largest single location, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina, last week we painted the rainbow flag on the walkway, which is becoming, I think, a bit of an accepted collective way that everyone is representing and joining in Pride Month. I had the great opportunity to cut that ribbon, and so we enjoyed that a great deal. We had hundreds of our colleagues around the country watching and participating as well. We also make sure last month in particular, but going into this, that we think about another group that we recently recognized on Memorial Day, which is all our veterans. So we always have in our various locations Memorial Day celebrations as well. And then, we do different things around different heritage. So last month was Asian American Month. We had 3 different dragon boats in a big dragon boat race. And I'm proud to say that we took home 2 gold medals and 1 silver medal. So we're very involved in recognizing and celebrating different heritages, different cultures, different approaches with speakers, with physical representations, with celebrations both in and out of the organization, and it's really who we are, what we stand for.
Yes.
We have a little calendar every month that shows all the different holidays. Not that we as a company are celebrating them all, but somebody in your team might be celebrating, a special holiday, and so we want everyone to know about it. So we really take this question of celebration and diversity and try to bring it into the day-to-day. And frankly, while we recognize the months that really do matter, I want to think about a diverse culture that covers, all 12 months with all activities. So one of the things that we did recently, about a year ago actually, was we expanded our maternity leave to be family leave, and however your family could be expanding, be it natural childbirth, an adoption, surrogacy, foster parents, whatever it may be, and for men and for women. And it turned out that got huge uptake from all of our male colleagues, both our straight male colleagues married to women, and then our gay colleagues as well, who through surrogacy were increasing their family, took the whole 4 months as well. And so that's that kind of thing that we do to sort of make sure I would use the word celebrate our diversity month by month when recognized, but also just every 12 months out of the year. Can I add one more thing about the way that we celebrate diversity in our company?
Yeah.
Which is we have employee resource groups, and we have them for various different groups of people, African Americans and Caribbean, LGBT, Hispanic, for women, Asians, etc. But we also have them around age, and one has to be sort of careful around generation is a better way to describe it. So we have one for the YoPros, and we're about to start one for our more experienced workers. And so we really find that's another great way to celebrate diversity and to recognize diversity, but in a very inclusive way, because anybody and everybody can be a member of any of these ERGs or can be an ally of the ERGs. And so we have a very open view about our ERGs.
Awesome. I think more companies should talk about diversity and inclusion. That is beautiful. I do love hearing that you have upped your family leave, not just maternity leave.
Yeah.
That's a great way to show off exactly how internally you are keeping up with diversity.
Absolutely.
Yes. I also am curious here. So we are talking diversity. You're in a financial institution. We have to talk about diversifying your financial portfolio, right?
Great segue.
Thank you. I was excited about that segue too. But let's talk about some tips and tricks that the average person may or may not know about in making sure your financial portfolio is as diverse as your company is.
Well, let's start with the point that you made about the average person may or may not know.
Yeah.
We plus others have done a fair amount of surveying, and we do in fact find that the level of financial literacy is relatively low in America overall. You also are aware, I think, of a statistic from the Federal Reserve that more than half of our families in the country could not pull together $400 for an emergency. So not just is financial literacy low, but financial security is often low. And that then takes us to, well, what should individuals know about investing? And let's try to keep it as simple as possible, knowing that the level of financial literacy is not super high. There are just 4 tips that at least come to my mind. First is to have a plan, have a goal, have an objective. Why are you saving? Why are you investing? And hopefully that goal will be short, intermediate, and long term. You want to save something so that you have that rainy day fund. You probably want to save maybe for an intermediate goal, perhaps if you're a renter to buy a house. And then you probably also have a long-term goal, all of us should, of saving for retirement. You can imagine I'm lead a retirement company, so I have to make sure people remember that one.
Yeah.
So, have goals. Make them simple, make them true to who you are. Secondly, understand a little bit about your risk profile. Because as you're investing, you want to invest in a way that's comfortable with the kind of risk you can take. Don't be overly aggressive and go for high flyers if you are going to be able to deal with the ups and downs of the market. At the same time, don't be so conservative that you miss some of the benefits of a more aggressive portfolio. So just be mindful of your risk profile, but also try to be sort of broad and thinking about risk in different ways, because too little risk is leads to bad results just as much as too much risk.
Now, I know you can't give direct advice as far as what to invest in, but do you have examples of companies that fall in line for low risk versus high risk?
Well, people often think that companies that have very predictable dividends are sort of low risk companies. So utilities, for example, a public oil and gas company. Consumer goods companies are thought to be lower risk in that they are predictable dividends. At the other end, you have companies that may be sort of high tech. They've been doing really well, but not always, and maybe just a bit more volatility might be there. The third part of what I suggest is a point that you already raised, which is when you're putting together your investment portfolio, think about broad diversity. It turns out that many individuals don't know that having a diverse portfolio is wise, but it is wise. So what does that mean? It means having some of the different kinds of things that we've talked about, some stock from a company that maybe has a more predictable dividend, maybe a stock from a company that doesn't pay dividend but grows rapidly. In addition to stock, so you may want some bonds, and you can get that maybe through, in a simple way, a certificate of deposit at your bank, which is a fixed income kind of investment. If you want to do something more adventuresome, maybe go into a bond fund. That's a mutual fund that has bonds as its investments, but fixed income focused. And then think about a third kind of asset that many people have, if you can afford it, which is your home, may also be an investment. And so you need to have real estate, and that's a way for many average individuals to have a broadly diversified portfolio. And then the final point I always make is to look at your portfolio once a year, not every week. Don't watch it closely. Don't get excited about the ups and downs. Once a year and say, okay, some of my assets, some of my investments have done really well. I'm disappointed in some others. Is this a good time to do what's called rebalancing? Maybe to sell some of the things that have done really well and invest in something else that has some upside. So, develop a plan, short, medium, long-term goals. Think about how much risk you want to take. Don't be too risk averse. Don't be jump to too much risk. Have a diversified portfolio, because you can't really foresee the future. And then once a year, take a look and see, well, how's the portfolio working versus the plan versus my risk appetite, and then should I make changes? We often suggest that people, by the way, do a rebalancing on their birthday, because it's a moment to celebrate. You've become a year older and hopefully wiser, and you want to see if your portfolio is keeping up with your age and your wisdom.
And I can remember that date.
Absolutely.
I do have one last question here for you in this last minute. I have never gotten to perform at a ribbon cutting ceremony, and I wanted to ask you what that was like.
The thing that's fascinating about it is you realize that they make these really large ceremonial scissors that actually work.
Yeah.
I didn't know they existed.
Yeah.
I thought it was a cardboard pair of scissors, then you
Then you
snipped away,
actually, yeah.
but you actually cut it with these scissors. So it was really, really wonderful. Had a great time, and then we walked across the rainbow walkway, and it was just a very celebratory moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Roger. This has been a real pleasure having you on. I appreciate your time.
Thanks. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on Connect and Collaborate today. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Find more information in the description below and leave us a comment. Have a great day.